My two previous videos on Dragon Ball were incredibly fun to make, so I figured we'd make this a series. When people think of Dragon Ball, some of the first images that are likely to spring to mind are that of Vegeta, Super Saiyans, screaming, power levels, scouters, and screaming. The list goes on and on. All of these things I just listed stem from the Z era of the franchise. But what about what came before it? The original Dragon Ball was a much different beast than any of its sequels. There was a larger focus on adventure and comedy over bombastic world-ending scuffles. The story was about Goku discovering the world around him and the friends he makes along the way. I won't go out there and say that Dragon Ball was more down to earth than Z because that's a flat out lie. Goku sends a mafia rabbit to the moon with a stick and defeats one of the most powerful military units single-handedly, almost by accident. And no, I didn't make that last one up. However, as far as fighting was concerned, they did play out as more personal affairs, having an emphasis on technique over flash. I love Dragon Ball a lot. In fact, I would even go as far as to say that I love it just as much, if not even a little bit more than Z. The manga is especially great. Overall, I'd rate the two like this. Z definitely has some of the series' highest points, but Dragon Ball is more consistent overall. I keep talking about them as if they're two separate entities, but in reality there never was a Z portion of the manga. Executives working on the anime at the time felt that the series needed some rebranding and a different art direction due to the ever-present change in tone the manga was undergoing. The transition can even be seen in the show itself. The earlier episodes of Dragon Ball Z would feature the softer character designs seen throughout Dragon Ball, but would slowly morph into something much more rigid and gritty later on. Thanks to Dragon Ball Z being a hit worldwide, the Z name just kinda became synonymous with the series as a whole. And if you're wondering about the Dragon Ball Z manga sold by Viz Media, that was most likely to boost sales. If you love DBZ but you've never watched or read Dragon Ball, give it a look, it's absolutely fantastic. Hell, it's probably the best way to get into the Dragon Ball series if I'm honest. Hence why in today's episode we're going to be looking at all the Dragon Ball games released in the West, starting with... Okay, so I know what I just said, but technically, I'm not breaking my own rules here. This game was released in the West, it just went by a different name, Dragon Power. Since Dragon Ball had yet to leave its mark on the US, the game had to be adapted to make it appear more Western. Some other things that were changed included characters' names, although Goku stayed the same for some reason. I guess you just can't mess with the balance of things. And obviously some of the more risque content had to be toned down because it's a Nintendo game. You just can't have sex in them Nintendo games. Bulma showing her panties was instead changed to sandwiches. Way to use the limitations of the NES to your advantage, guys. But I want to play as Goku, not Alex Kidd in Karate World. Except there's one problem. I don't own a Famicom, let alone an NES, and I could use something like the Retron 5, however, I've got something rather cool instead to show you guys. That being this. For those of you who don't know, which I'm guessing is quite a few of you, this is a special variant of the NES Classic which was released exclusively in Japan to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Shonen Jump. I'll go over this in a future video, but you can think of Shonen Jump like the Marvel Comics of Japan. The 20 included games are all based on Shonen Jump properties, and as luck would have it, one of those games just so happens to be Dragon Ball Shenron no Nazo. Right, now that I've gone through all that effort to play an obscure NES game for the internet that nobody cares about, let me tell you why I don't like it. This game comes to us from 1986 by a studio named Tosei Software. I believe that's how you say that. They would go on to produce various other Dragon Ball games as well as co-develop World of Final Fantasy. This is an NES game. That's honestly the best way I feel like I can describe it. The NES was no stranger to licensed shovelware crap, and while I'd hesitate to put this game in said category, it really isn't that great. The game covers the Peel-Off saga and eventually moves on to its own story after the fact. It isn't exactly a looker, but I can forgive it since it is 86, and the environments are at least more detailed than the original Legend of Zelda. The game even has what some may describe as cutscenes. They're extremely minimal and the animations are downright hilarious, but I do admire the decent attempt to accurately tell the story. As Goku, you need to punch your way through enemies whilst also clearing whatever tasks the game feels like handing out to you. Sometimes it's as simple as getting to the end, and other times you need to hunt down something specific like a Dragon Ball in order to succeed. Combat has the same problem as the original Legend of Zelda. Since you need to get up close to the enemy to actually hit them, most of the time you'll end up accidentally touching them instead. The game doesn't pull its punches either. Dying in a level gets you a game over, and while you do have unlimited continues, you're forced to start the entire chapter over again, and each of them vary in length. Sometimes you'll be pitted against an enemy one-on-one, and if you think this change in perspective makes it better, no, you'd be wrong, it actually makes it worse. There's no strategy to this. Other than jumping, which is piss poor, Goku doesn't really have any means of dodging enemy attacks. The enemies also don't have any recognisable attack patterns like they do in, say, Mega Man or Castlevania. Goku can get his hands on some temporary upgrades which let him use the power pole, but most of the time his fists are the default option. If that wasn't bad enough, some levels require you to go in and out of buildings to find certain items needed to beat the stage. Not only can enemies respawn, but sometimes when you enter the room you'll be totally blindsided, through no fault of your own. And thanks to these buildings looking exactly the same, don't be surprised if this happens multiple times in the exact same spot. And still it gets worse, because you see your power meter up there, yeah, the one that's constantly ticking down, yeah, that does that regardless of whether or not you actually get hit. If I had to guess why it does this, in the show, Goku would be unable to fight if he was hungry. Normally, I'd be all over this attention to detail, but when the game's already pissing me off, I can't say this helps. The music also makes me want to tear my ears off. Shenron no Nazo has some good things going for it, but unfortunately the novelty wears off and it becomes almost impossible to recommend. I got to the fight with the armchair and I just couldn't take it anymore, only an hour and a half in actually. I could use save states to force myself through the rest of the game, but what would be the point in that if I'm already not having fun? Nevertheless, I am glad I got to experience this, not just as my first Famicom game, but also as a cool little relic in Dragon Ball's history. Released in 2004, this was a game developed by Dimps. Now, Dimps are a company that I am more than familiar with at this point. Their most notable claims to fame are their work on the Street Fighter series as well as the handheld Sonic games. All really great stuff, and they continue to have a hand in Dragon Ball games to this day. Not only did they develop the Budokai series, but they've also had their hands in the Xenoverse games as well. This game covers every arc of Dragon Ball, from Pilaf all the way to King Piccolo. The game is a side-scrolling beat-em-up with slight platforming elements sprinkled here and there. You know what? This game is actually really fun. Much like the Sonic Advance games, the sprite art here is top notch. What they lack in detail, they make up for in fluidity, which in a series like Dragon Ball is super important. Goku can perform a basic punch combo, as well as release a super attack with the L button if you have enough ki. Goku can also perform a wall jump in the same way you would in Super Metroid if you need a good reference. It's not exactly easy to pull off, you need to press the jump button and the direction you want to go in tandem, or else it just won't activate. Later on you'll also learn the Kamehameha, which is fairly broken in this game because it doesn't drain your ki. The power pole does, but the literal beam of ki energy does not. Try figuring that one out. Exploring the levels thoroughly enough will also net you some health and ki upgrades, as well as just extra shit in general. There is a ton of stuff to unlock in this game. You can play as Krillin after beating the game with Goku, and if you beat it with Krillin you get to play as King Piccolo. Each level never takes too long to complete, so the simple repetitive gameplay never borders on monotony. Since Dragon Ball has Goku going all over the world, there's tons of level variety here too. The sound design is also fantastically crunchy, every single hit is just so satisfying. Beating up bad guys isn't the only thing you'll be doing though, there's also one-on-one battles which play a bit like a diet Street Fighter. You still have the same moves, but your main objective is to wear down your opponent's ki meter, stunning them, allowing you to follow up with a flurry of punches. Pressing down and B before your opponent's attack lands performs a reversal which puts a massive dent into their ki meter. If you have another GBA on hand, you can even play 2-player, which I can imagine is a pretty fun time. Too bad I probably couldn't find anybody in this day and age that'll let me play it with them. I mean, who wants to play an obscure Dragon Ball game on the Game Boy Advance? If this was its own thing, then I'd imagine it would get old fairly quickly, but as a supplement to the regular gameplay, it does the trick quite nicely. And that's not all, there are even levels where you get to ride on Nimbus. They play a lot like Sky Chase from Sonic 2, your moveset is still the same, but it just adds a bit of level diversity, which is always nice. Sadly though, it isn't all perfect. This game likes to throw the same enemy pool for the majority of the game. The only time where they start to mix things up is when King Piccolo enters the scene, and that is right near the tail end of the game. The music is also pretty bland, nothing offensive to the ears, but certainly nothing you're going to listen to after the game is over. The presentation for the cutscenes is also fairly plain, but hey, it's the GBA, I can't necessarily hold it against them. This is a really cool little game we've got here. It isn't anything mind-blowing, it's not going to set your world on fire, but if you're a fan of beat-em-ups and you like Dragon Ball, I feel comfortable calling this a hidden gem. With fun, addictive gameplay that doesn't overstay its welcome and a ton of extra stuff to keep you busy after the credits roll, this one's a keeper, that's for damn sure. Okay, so I'll be frank with you, out of all the games I was looking at for this video, this one was the one that I was the most excited to play, which is why it upsets me that it actually turned out to be one of the most disappointing of the bunch, Shenron no Naruto notwithstanding. I haven't really put much emphasis on this so far since the NES and the GBA aren't exactly powerhouses. However, even with the Wii, corners have been cut here. I do like the models, the cell shading gives it a manga style look, which is really nice. One thing I just can't get over, however, is how terrible the lip syncing is. Sometimes characters will be talking and their mouths just won't move at all. It feels like a budget license title, that's for sure. Those Budokai style cutscenes are a rarity though, most of the time you'll just be getting character portraits and text. Oddly enough, the voice cast here is actually the original Funimation one and not the Kai cast, despite them being released in the exact same year. Not that I have a problem with that, mind you, I love Stephanie Nadolny's portrayal of Kid Goku. Gohan not so much, but her Goku really sells the blissful naivety of the character to me. I am a huge fan of old school beat 'em ups, Streets of Rage, Final Fight, Turtles in Time, oh they're all so good. Something that I love about the 3 games that I just listed is that they're short, they're easy to pick up and play. Beat 'em ups by their very nature are repetitive, so easy to understand gameplay is imperative, but because of that, you don't want the game to go on too long. This game is over 10 hours long. Okay, so here's the deal. This game has 9 chapters, and within those 9 chapters are 1 to 5 acts, which can vary in length. Whereas Advanced Adventure may have condensed Muscle Tower into just 1 level, this game spreads it out into 4. There's a lot of story here too, the Red Ribbon Army all the way to King Piccolo. Once again you play as Kid Goku, beating up thugs, doing basic combos, going through the motions, etc, etc, etc. You've got super attacks that you can activate if you've got enough ki, seen that before, and you can kick back projectiles a la Sonic's homing attack. Guys, I really don't know what you want me to say here. If you've played a game of this type, Dragon Ball Revenge of King Piccolo has nothing new to show you, like literally nothing. There are pieces of Dragon Ball memorabilia that you can collect, but they don't do anything outside of making nerds like me go, oh yeah, I remember that. Levels do grade you, and while I'm all for an arcade experience, the game needs to be fun first before I decide to push myself to do better. Mechanically the game works fine and you can have a bit of fun with it for the first couple hours, but it quickly overstays its welcome. There's not even any characters to play as outside of versus mode, which in comparison to Advanced Adventure, a handheld game, is downright laughable. If you like what you see here, then maybe give it a go, but this certainly isn't one I'm going to go back to. Again, it's only for the fans if you are to pick it up, or if you're a fan of this kind of game, but I must stress, it's not all that good. I know you think I'm skipping over stuff here, but believe me, I'm not. This game really is that bland. These games were developed by Game Republic, which I'd love to tell you more about, but unfortunately I don't really have much on them outside of these two games. How very reassuring. Starting with Origins 1, I gotta say, this is a really nice looking game. Not many DS games choose to go the full 3D model route, but I'll be damned if this game doesn't put it off remarkably well. The models are nicely detailed with only a few uncanny facial expressions here and there. Oolong looks fucking stoned. I'm also not a fan of how the cutscenes are split between two screens. I get what they were going for, but when you record it, it just looks really weird. Credit where credit is due though, we do actually get animated cutscenes this time, and it's better than anything we've had before. And for a DS game, that's kind of shocking, to be honest. This is largely thanks to the fact that these two games are significantly scaled back in terms of scope. Origins only covers 2 arcs per game. Because of that, the devs are able to spend more time fleshing out each arc, which is definitely appreciated. If you've ever played the DS Zelda games, Origins is a lot like it. You can control Goku with the D-pad, however most of your main actions will be done via the touchscreen. Goku can switch between combat mode and power pole mode, each coming with its own strengths and drawbacks. Combat mode is a lot faster but does less damage, whereas power pole mode has better defense and range but worse mobility. I normally just stick with either one or the other because switching between one mid-fight is very cumbersome. Power pole mode is also needed to bypass various obstacles and hazards, and as you progress you will gain new abilities including the Kamehameha. The Kamehameha is so cool in this game as it gets more powerful the longer you hold the manga style letters, which feels very authentic to how they charge in the show. There are also levels where you ride on Nimbus like an Advanced Adventure, and they are some of my favourite parts of this game. They use the 2 screens in order to give you better depth perception and add some verticality, which really does make you feel like you're flying through the clouds. Makes me sad they never made an Origins 3 for 3DS because this would be a perfect fit for it. You probably think I quite like this game. Kinda, sorta. I mean, it certainly isn't terrible, but I think what kills it for me is just how much you need to use the touchscreen. It's just not my preferred way to play a game, and it kinda hurts my neck looking down after a while. Having to switch modes every time I need to clear the same obstacle also doesn't help with my enjoyment. There's that, and from what I played, the game is painfully easy, both in terms of combat and puzzles. Throughout the levels you can find items to upgrade your health and key meters, but they aren't really needed. Zenny can be racked up real easy, and with that you can buy all sorts of consumables to pretty much guarantee you'll never lose. Bomber does tag along with you in some levels, but I found that as long as you stick with her, you don't really need to panic. Health pickups are abundant, and even the AI seems to take care of themselves just fine. As far as puzzles go, they are too simple. I get stumped really easily with this kind of stuff, and I got through it with no issues, so that's saying something. Not awful, but I can't recommend this over something like Spirit Tracks. Dragon Ball Origins 2 immediately made a good first impression as soon as I turned on the game, asking you which style you'd prefer, buttons or touchscreen, which is just how I like it. The only downside to using the buttons is that the special moves are generally easier to pull off with the touchscreen. It's a small price to pay for what I consider to be a more comfortable experience. You still do quite a bit of dungeon crawling, however Origins 2 puts a lot more focus on combat than its predecessor. Switching between modes has been made much easier, only requiring a tap of the L button, and the power pole is no longer required to clear hazards. Don't expect to be weaving out of the styles in and out like it's Devil May Cry, but you do have more flexibility here than before. Combo scrolls are also hidden in each level, adding new moves and keeping it from going stale like in Revenge of King Piccolo. If that wasn't enough, Goku isn't the only playable character in this game. Of course, you get characters like Krillin and Yamcha, but you also get characters that we rarely ever get to play as, such as Bulma and Android 8. Each of them coming with their own special abilities. Goku can swing on poles with his tail, Krillin can light up dark areas with his head, and Bulma can use various guns and gadgets. It also helps that they play very similar to Goku as to not feel like a hindrance. That, and the game has been made much harder. Bosses dish out quite a bit of pain, and on top of that, the shop prices here are ludicrous, so you can't spam consumables like before. I actually take the time to learn the boss's attack patterns and not just brute force them like the first game. Colour me impressed, this is actually a pretty good game. Most of the stuff remains unchanged from the first, but what has been changed has been done in all the right areas. The first game was never bad, it just needed more polish, and I'm happy to say that we got that in this game. I'll definitely be returning to this one some point in the future. A lot of you might be asking the question why I even bother talking about these games in the first place. After all, most of you just consider these games to be licensed crap, and we've only managed to deco a couple of hidden gems here and there. And while, I understand that sentiment, I agree with that sentiment slightly, I wanted to do these games not just because I like Dragon Ball, but also because when it comes to game preservation, even games that don't get released, like popular games that don't get released years and years and years from now, even if they don't get a re-release, they'll still have people backing them, they'll still have people in their corner fighting for their right to exist and for people to play them. Games like Origins 2 and Advanced Adventure are ones I worry about the most in terms of game preservation, because nobody will really be there fighting for them, and given what they offer isn't bad, I think that they should be played by more people, especially fans of the series. So that's why I want to dedicate more time to these games. Not to say that we'll be overloading the channel with Dragon Ball, of course, but I do want to take this time to, talk about a series that I love and maybe introduce you guys to some games that you never even considered playing before. Nevertheless, if you think we're done with Goku for the time being, then, well, take a look.